ROOAKHPTAH. So in today's video, family, I'm going to be teaching the foundation of NUWAUBU. And for those of you who don't know, if you've been in the nation for quite a long time, you know that scrolls are written consistently and the information is constantly updated, or depending on what school of thought we're in at that particular moment, certain information will be disseminated that renders other, older information a little bit outdated. That's how we see it in the community. However, I'm going to be teaching from the perspective of the Imperial Order Worldwide, which is a movement that I created as a Nuwaubianist movement to be able to better reach people in a comprehensive way with what we teach. And I'm going to be explaining why we of the Imperial Order teach it that way, as opposed to what we call in the Imperial Order Orthodox Nuwaubians, in the way that they actually teach the teachings. Now, here's a point that I want everybody watching this video to understand. Most cultures that have a teaching, or most religions that have a teaching, have a foundation that is systematically and comprehensively taught to people when they first come in. And the reason for a foundation is because you can't start a person from advanced science if they don't even know the basics of what they stand on and how to interpret or identify themselves with that. And so I created a foundation for NUWAUBU, and it was inspired by verses out of the Holy Tablets written by Pops himself. So, and I'm going to be showing those verses at each level that I actually explain the different concepts with inside of the foundation. Now, before I get started on that, I would like to say that concepts are nothing more than titles that describe what we have learned to accept in whatever belief system or body of teachings that we actually embrace. So nothing that I'm going to be expounding on is actually new, except the titles that represent the concepts of beliefs that we already have. And so we get started by actually talking about a term that we call in the Imperial Order Tanweeb. And Tanweeb is the term that we use to describe the foundation of NUWAUBU. Now, when you break the term Tanweeb down, right, you pick the letters apart, you come up with the three-part verb NWB, or Nun, Wow, and Bad, right? And this three-part verb is found throughout the words Nuwaubian, NUWAUPU, and NUWABIC, right? It's from those three letters that all of those words are actually formed. When we actually put a TA before the N and we insert two E's, which makes it a long E between the W and the B, it forms the word Tanweeb. Now, by literal definition, the word actually means Nuwaubianization. And the reason why we say that is because the TA prefix actually describes a word that has a TION suffix, like Asian, right? And so the literal meaning would be Nuwaubianization. However, the TA prefix also can mean in a state of. So when we interpret it as TION, it literally means Nuwaubianization. When we interpret it as the state of, it forms itself from the word NUWAUPU, which means sound right reasoning. So it would mean to us in the Imperial Order as to be in a state of sound right reasoning, right? And when we're in a state of sound right reasoning, this is called mental and physical liberation from adverse forces. And so thus the foundation is about achieving mental and physical liberation from adverse forces, as we've been taught by the master teacher Pa Nuwaubian. And you'll see the verses inside of this video that factually backs that up. And so Tanweeb being our foundation of the imperial order, right? It consists of Al-Istahda, which is a Nuwaubic term that represents declaration. Its second aspect or concept would be Arbed Naya Hagat, which translates in our dialect as the Four Noble Facts. The third concept would be the Chesed Farok Naya Torak, which would translate as the Fivefold Noble Path. The next concept would be Tared Rakuzat, which would translate to be three aspects. The next concept would be Chesed Kenrohat, which translates to be five principles. And the final concept would be called Seted Madupat, which would mean 6 articles. So I'm going to explain each concept so that you would understand how the system of Tanweeb works when we're teaching it in the imperial order. So the first concept is a declaration. And the reason we formed the declaration, El-Istahda, is because inside of the Holy Tablets, it taught us that Armageddon was a mental war, right? And in this mental war, it would climax until all woolly-haired people, dark-skinned woolly-haired people with the power to identify themselves with non-ether actually began to identify themselves with non-ether. So non-ether in our way of life is taught as the creative spiritual substance of dark-skinned woolly-haired people. It says that it's all existing gases of nature and that nothing anywhere could be as powerful as all existing gases of nature. Therefore, non-ether is the most potent power in all the boundless universes. And so from this concept, we learned inside of the doctrine that non-ether basically was our creator or our God. So the first thing we do is get our brothers and sisters that come into the imperial order is to identify with that. And to identify with something only means that you see yourself as the same thing, right? So the declaration represents an oath of allegiance to our spiritual substance. And we say, La insa il al-nub wa la farida lahum, right? La insa il al-nub in our dialect of Nuwaubic means no dark-skinned woolly-haired people would exist if non-ether did not create them. And wala farida lahum states that, and they are not divisible. And what we mean by these two clauses is if the master teacher says that non-ether created us, then that particular spiritual substance is our God or our creator. Not in a worship form. I'm saying from the standpoint or perspective of creating something. The second clause links us and unites us in an identity with it to identify with it as Walafari. The Lahum is basically saying that we are not divisible because non-ether is the spiritual substance and we are the physical manifestation of that spiritual substance. Thus, we say in the imperial order, I and non-ether are one. So this is like a form of oneness, if you want to look at it that way, that we are one with that spiritual substance. It is us, we are it. And so that's where we begin the newcomer students that come inside of the imperial order, so that they recognize their creative spiritual substance. So the second concept inside of Tanweeb would be El-Arbed Naya Hagat. And what that translates into is El is the, Arbed is for, Naya means noble, and Hagat means facts. And the purpose of the Four Noble Facts is to teach the foundation of why NUWAUPU exists. And if anybody has been following the master teacher long enough, they know that the whole purpose of NUWAUPU is to break the spell of Leviathan, right? Without the spell existing, NUWAUPU couldn't exist because there'd be no need to, reform people psychologically and behaviorally if they were not under the spell. And so newcomers need to understand that the spell of Leviathan is the #1 enemy of the NUWAUBIAN community, right? And so the Four Noble Facts deals with the origin, the nature, the origin of the spell, the breaking of the spell, and the path that we use in NUWAUPU to break that spell. And so now in our dialect of Nuwaubic, we use the term Zalm for the spell of Leviathan. And Zalm originates from the word for ignorance, or to ignore the facts, because as we've been taught by the master teacher, Panabab Yanun, that spell is spiritual ignorance and racial blindness. And ignorance means to ignore the facts. So a state of ignorance is what we're trying to counteract, which we are terming that the spell. And so we use the term Zalm when we're describing that. So I'm going to give you the concepts in our dialect of Nuwaubic and English, so that we usually teach it in our dialect. So when they commit it to memory, they pretty much internalize it in their own language. So Zalm has a nature, right? Nature is characteristics of something. And so the characteristics or the nature of Zalm is psychological and behavioral, right? It affects the mind and the conduct or the actions, right? So then Zalm also has an origin. It comes from somewhere, or it comes from something. The third concept deals with the breaking of Zalm, or the spell of Leviathan. And so, the spell is broken by denying and rejecting that which is not factual, right, and can't be proven. And in the fourth concept, there is a path that we use, that we practice, right? This is the practical application of breaking the spell and, putting forth the actual habits that will not only break the spell, but keep you out of the spell, right? And that path is what we use to counteract the spell. So now let's go into the information of the Arbad Naya Hagat, the Four Noble Facts. The first fact is the fact that Zalm exists, and it exists as a psycho-behavioral anti-bioexematic conditioning of dark-skinned woolly-haired people, which causes us to be in mental and physical bondage to adverse forces and causes us to reflexively think, speak, and act illogical and unreasonable. Now, when you break that concept down, everything that the master teacher was teaching us was about us embracing illogical and unreasonable concepts. And even when you go into the breaking down of the word Leviathan, right? Levi meaning law and Athan meaning sin, but sin coming from the ancient Mesopotamian moon deity, Nanar Sin, which we know that in the ancient culture that moon and water represented certain concepts of rationalism, right? And so thus, when you go and you do some studying of the word, and y'all can go look this up if y'all want to, I advise that you do. When true sin is illogical and unreasonable thinking, that's it. It has absolutely nothing with disobeying a God or anything, because what you're dealing with when you're talking about Leviathan is information processing. And the reason why Leviathan has such a negative connotation is because if one lacks the ability to reason, or if one allows something to, allow their reasoning to be dormant, then they can end up in a living hell because you can't make the proper decisions. So the whole concept of breaking the spell of Leviathan actually deals with learning to think logically and rationally. Therefore, the culture was called NUWAUPU, right? It was about sound, right reasoning. And when you break down sound, right reasoning literally translates is to unshakable facts and logic, So it's to make us more thinking, rational beings by disseminating a lot of facts about different things that we have been miseducated on. So now going to the second fact in the Arabet Naya Hagat with the origin. The second fact is the fact that the spell originates from Luciferian controlled spiritual, secular, and racial miseducation, which causes dark-skinned, woolly-haired people to have spiritual ignorance and racial blindness, causing them to be spiritually, culturally, and racially divided amongst themselves. So if you go back into the writings of the master teacher, once again, breaking the spell, what is NUWAUBU? What it's basically trying to explain to us is that 6,000 years ago that this spell is cast. Now, I'm going to translate what it means to cast a spell. When you say cast a spell, you're talking about relaying information. Therefore, a spell is cast when information is relayed in the form of misinformation that causes us to have fundamental misconceptions of reality. And a fundamental misconception of reality by misinformation is the literal definition, or I should say interpretation, of a spell. And so we know that this was done by the Luciferians, the Tamahuls, or whatever names that they've been given. And we know that by embracing this level of information by these beings, that it would cause us to actually think, speak, and act illogically and unreasonably. And so that's why the second concept stands as a fact. The third concept of the Arabet Naya Hagat is called Kasorozon, right? Now, the origin of the spell, we say in our language, Aslunuzon. And Aslunuzon means origin of the spell. Kasorozon, in our dialect of the language, means breaking the spell. And the third fact of the Arabet Naya Hagat is the fact that the spell is broken when all dark-skinned, woolly-haired people have the power to actually deny and reject alien religion, the spirit forces of alien religion, and their names. Okay, so when you go again into the writings of the master teacher, you find that the spell can only be broken when we deny and reject the misinformation that we've been fed for so many thousands of years. You can't embrace it and then still not be under the spell. If you embrace those teachings, then you're definitely under the spell. So therefore, the opposite or the opposing side would be to deny and reject those false teachings or false doctrines. So the third concept of the Four Noble Facts, or the Arabet Naya Hagat, is explaining to you how you will know when the spell is broken. So the fourth and final fact of the Four Noble Facts, called Patarak, translates as the path, is the fact that the way to counteract the spell and achieve mental and physical liberation from adverse forces is by following what we call the Chesed Farouk Naya Tarak, which translates as the fivefold noble path. And the fivefold noble path is Sah Dahuth, right knowledge; Sah Hakundum, right wisdom; Sah Thahum, right understanding; Sah Sabu, right reasoning; and Sah Istashkhag, right action. And if anybody know the doctrine, as well as I know the doctrine, you will know that all of these five things are throughout all of the writings of the master teacher. So again, these are not new things that we believe in. The only thing that took place was words and word phrases were created to identify what we already have learned to accept. So the next concept in the Tanweed Foundation is the Chesed Farouk Naya Tarak, the fivefold noble path. And in the Chesed Farouk Naya Tarak, what we of the Imperial Order break down is right knowledge, and we give an explanation of what it is: right wisdom, right overstanding, right reasoning, and right action. So Sahdahuth teaches us to only accept information that can be proven to be a fact. And a fact is proven to be a fact by experience, evidence, and reasoning. Why? Because we experience evidence and we use it to reason, right? And the explanation of that is Sahdahuth, or right knowledge, is the ability to be able to draw the proper conclusion in words about an object or an event. Let me explain what I mean, family. Okay, so in case y'all didn't really know, NUWAUPU is a fancy term for scientific method. It's basically teaching you proper information processing, right? And right knowledge, right wisdom, right overstanding, right reasoning, and right action are the methodology of that information processing, right? Or I should say, right knowledge, right wisdom, right overstanding, and right reasoning are the methodology of that information processing. And right action is, if you're following that properly, this will breed those results. Your conduct or your actions and your thinking will be the result of following that information processing. And so therefore, when we information process, you have to understand that humans have been given two mechanisms for information processing. One is our senses, right? And two is our mind. Now, when you really get down to what information really is, right? In and forma, anything in a form, basically it represents that anything that can be detected by the physical senses. Anything that can be detected by the physical senses, by definition, is information, because it is in a form, and we can only process it, or detect it by our senses. So we use our senses to detect information, and we use our mind to process that information. And the way that we process that information, I've explained this before, you need a language. The reason why you need a language is because everything that the senses process, we label it, right? And you use words to be able to label what your physical senses have detected. Therefore, when we say right knowledge is only information that is based on facts, right? Or a fact is anything that can be proven by experience, evidence, or reason. I'm going to say this again, because we experience through our senses evidence and we use it to reason. And so the next concept in the Khasai Farouk Nayatara that is taught in the Imperial Order is called Sahakumdum, right? Which is right wisdom. And right wisdom teaches us to know how and when to use right knowledge. That is to know how and when to apply the facts. And the explanation of that is, right wisdom is the ability to be able to draw the correct conclusion, right, about an object or an event. And I'm going to explain that. If your senses detect something, right, your mind is going to process it in a way that you can identify what that thing that your senses have detected is, right? And inside of NUWAUPU, it teaches us that right wisdom is to know how and when to use the facts, right? And so everything has its proper place. So when we're able to actually draw the correct conclusion about how and when an object should or should not, or event should or should not be used, this gives us what's called proper judgment. That's all right wisdom is. It's proper judgment to know how and when to do these particular things, right? Or use these particular things, or its inner workings. Okay, so the next concept is Sahtahum. And Sahtahum is right overstanding, right? Sahtahum teaches us to develop the capacity and capability to completely comprehend the information that is received by the senses and the mind, and to develop the ability to use it, reflect it, and transmit it in the intended way. Everything that we process, if you properly process it, you will know how to use it, reflect it, or basically be able to digest it in a way psychologically that you can demonstrate through physical action that you comprehended. For example, if you have a student, right, and you're teaching your student information, unless that student demonstrates that they can use, reflect, right, or transmit that information in the intended way, you'll never know if they actually comprehended it. So right overstanding, the reason why we use the term overstand is because based on a complete comprehension of what we've learned, we can use, reflect, or transmit. We can demonstrate these things to show that we know, we pretty much know what we've learned. And so right overstanding is the ability to demonstrate the capacity and capability that has allowed you to comprehend the information. So going to the next concept in the Chesed Faruq Naya Torah called Sabu, right reasoning. Right reasoning teaches us to develop the capacity and capability to properly analyze and synthesize information to bring about effective results and solution. Okay, so through proper reasoning, this aspect of information processing, we learn how to analyze, right, which is pick apart, and we learn how to synthesize, which is bring back together information through our research so that we can best draw the proper conclusion. If one fails at the analyzation stage of information processing, you're definitely going to fail at the synthesis stage of information processing, because if you can't properly analyze, you can't properly synthesize, and these faculties are actually needed in order for us to decipher true information from false information, right? So right reasoning is the ability to demonstrate that your capacity and capability has allowed you to properly analyze and synthesize information that was received by the mind by being able to present logically valid proof of your conclusion. Notice that when I'm explaining all this, it goes right back to scientific method, which technically, well, I should say literally, that's what NUWAUBU is. It is scientific method of information processing. And so thus, Pops created a learning environment to teach us how to do that. And his medium for teaching us how to do that were the scrolls. Okay, so the last fold of the Chesed Faruq Naya Torah, the fivefold noble path, is called Sah Istashkhek, which means right action. And right action teaches us to develop proper conduct. That is to exercise a strict control over our thoughts, words, actions, and emotions, bringing about an efficiency of thought and productivity of action, right? And so basically, right action is the ability to control oneself according to empirical and rational processes of scientific method combined with a strict control over our emotions. When you go inside of the Holy Tablets, and I'm going to actually put this on the screen for y'all, it tells us what the 3 steps to power are. And one of the 3 steps to power is the control of our various emotions and getting things done through right knowledge, right wisdom, and sound right reasoning, right? And so, again, all of these concepts that's within inside of Tanweeb were inspired by the writings of the master teacher. They're not new. It actually spoke about in the Holy Tablets that knowledge received outside of an organized sequence would be confusing. It says if knowledge is not to be confusing and thereby ineffective, then it must be given an organized sequence. And an organized sequence is a foundation or a step-by-step comprehensive way in getting people to be able to grasp and understand whatever it is that they are learning, right? So we go to the next aspect of it, and it's called El-Taled Rakuzat, 3 aspects. Now, the 3 aspects of Tanweeb would be Tanweeb Mendeyun, which means mental and physical liberation from alien religion. Tanweeb Min Kalau Shaduyat wa Isumathum, that's mental and physical liberation from the spirit forces of alien religion and their names. And Tanweeb Min Fak Zahuthat, which means mental and physical liberation from false identity. Now, when I start to show y'all this stuff in the Holy Tablets, y'all are gonna, it should blow your mind, because even though people think that, or as Pops have said, actually, that the Holy Tablets is outdated, the concepts still stand because you see it as a common thread through all the scrolls, right? So think about this. Before I move on, I'm going to make this point. Think about trying to teach someone NUWAUPU without teaching them what the spell is. Think about trying to teach someone NUWAUPU without trying to teach them what non-ether is. Think about trying to teach someone NUWAUPU without actually teaching them the basis, the foundation of why it exists, how it came about. Because when these questions come up, who is God and what is our creator? Because we don't believe in a spook, right? You're going to have to say something to that particular individual to teach them where our race comes from. I'm speaking of us specifically, because I want to prove a point here that you cannot teach NUWAUPU without teaching non-ether. You cannot teach NUWAUPU without teaching people what the spell is and where it came from, right? And what, as well as what it is. What is the spell, right? So all of these particular concepts would be considered the fundamentals of NUWAUPU, irregardless to what other scrolls are written and what's being said in those scrolls. These things could never change, because if that changed, it would give no validity to the reason of NUWAUPU existing. And so in the imperial order, this is the way that we actually teach, because if you have no foundation to stand on for your identity, for your beliefs, and what you stand for, then that's going to be kind of shaky for most people. And I noticed that NUWAUPU was not given these things systematically, but we were actually given these things. So what I did was I put it together through my research, and when I basically began teaching through the imperial order worldwide, I started to teach people this way, because it's a more comprehensive way of explaining who we are, and what we stand on. And that is key. That's golden. We can never get away from that. If you get away from that, then you really aren't even one of us, because how could you not stand on these things, no matter how many new scrolls is written, if this is the foundation? So the imperial order is based on those fundamental concepts. So going back to El-Taled Rakuzat, the three aspects of Tanweeb, the first one is Tanweeb Mendeyum. And in the three aspects, it's an actual psychologically practical way of creating for ourselves a mental atmosphere within our own minds to break the spell. Because according to Pops, the spell must be denied and rejected. And when we say the spell, we're talking about alien religions, the spirit forces of alien religions, and their names, right? So what we do with the three aspects is we outline that in three parts. Tanweeb Mendeyum, right? Which is mental and physical liberation from alien religion. Now, how do we have mental and physical liberation from these things? And how do we deny and reject these things? And this is what I'm going to explain. So mental liberation from alien religion, right, comes with denying that religion. And to deny and reject that religion, to deny it means to declare that it is untrue. And we know that the doctrines of monotheistic religion are not factual. Therefore, when we say that it is not factual as NUWAUBIANs, or when we say that it cannot be substantiated by time nor situation, what we're doing psychologically is denying that religion. The reason why the master teacher called it alien is because it's not our own. It's not one's own. Not alien as in coming from one country to another. Alien as in something that is foreign to us, that's not our own. So you deny alien religion by declaring that it is untrue. You reject it by refusing to accept it and practice it, right? And so when you deny alien religion and when you reject alien religion, that starts the process of, putting yourself in a state of sound right reasoning. Tanweeb. Okay, so the second aspect of the Talat Rakuzat, the three aspects, is Tanweeb min kalau shaduyat wa ismathum, right? And what that means is mental and physical liberation from alien spirit forces and their names. So this aspect is teaching us to deny the spirit forces, their Jesus, their angelic concepts. All of the spirit forces that come along with alien religions must be denied and rejected because it's not our own. It's not in our image and after our likeness. Or as we would say, if we really get down to the true spiritual essence of it, those are not non-ether beings. And if they're not non-ether beings, then that's alien to us. So we deny the spirit forces and what ismathum and their names. Jesus is a Greek name, right? And therefore it has a European connotation. So we can't liberate ourselves by still being under the tutelage of the Tamil, right? And so inside of this concept, we are denying the Tamahu Jesus. We are denying the Tamahu image of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to put, as the Muslims would say. We are denying their Allah. We are denying and rejecting their Jehovah because we understand that in a spiritual sense, right, these particular concepts are relative to 6 ether beings. And I'm going to show you that from the writings of the master teacher, right? So to summarize the second aspect of the Talat Rakuzat, the 3 aspects, we are denying and rejecting the spirit forces of alien religion and their names, which means that we do not refer to our spirit forces by foreign languages. That's what it is. And we have a language. We have several dialects of our language. So you could choose one. If you don't want to go with the new one, you could go with the one before that. But we have our own language to identify our own spiritual concepts. So that's what the second aspect of the Talat Rakuzat is expounded on. And the third concept is called Tanweeb min fak zahuthet. And what that means is mental and spiritual liberation from false identity. And what we mean in that concept is, remember when Pops told us to throw away their titles? Okay, so not calling yourself Christian, not calling yourself Muslim, not calling yourself Jew, not calling yourself those things that keep us attached to the tutelage, or I should say the ideology of 6 ether beings, right? Because those are not, Christ is a moon word according to the holy tablets, right? And it links with Leviathan. So therefore, if the whole purpose of NUWAUBU was to counteract the spell of Leviathan, then anything that deals with the spell of Leviathan must be denied and rejected. So that's the 3 aspects. Okay, so I'm gonna actually start to expound on why the titles, as far as with the dialect of Nuwaubic that we speak. Okay, so when the Ansar Allah community was changing the school, Nubic, the school of thought, Nubic was the next language after Arabic to be taught inside of the tab. And Nubic was basically the Arabic spoken by the Mu'minuns inside of the tab. And Pops published a book on it. And then the language started to make different transitions as we grew in our understanding of ancient languages, our pronunciation, and things of that nature. What took place with a lot of us was Arabic was mixed until it was grafted out of the Nuwaubic language. But for some of us that spoke and still speak Arabic, we actually combine the Arabic with the Nuwaubic from the Riskian dialect, right? That's, the teacher's guide to the Nuwaubian's language. You can find that there. And when we did that, we created a unique dialect that is not really used right now, because what they're speaking now is Sabbatic, or Sabaic, that's we don't in the imperial order we don't use it like that. So we basically have Arabic combined with that, making a Creole language basically. Our dialect is what you would call Arabic Creole, and Arabic-based Creole of NUWAUPU. And so most of these titles come from that particular dialect, and that's just the way that we speak in the imperial order. And but you can find all of these words somewhere throughout dictionaries written by the master teacher of our language. So these words, again, are not new. That was my whole point of explaining that. So now what I want to do is I want to get some comments from you guys. And in my next video, I'm going to actually further explain the concepts of Tanweed, so that people will not try to ridicule and say, oh, what is he doing? He shouldn't do this. He shouldn't do that. I'm going to show you, when you look down at the bottom of the screen, or I have shown you by placing it on the screen, all of the verses out of the holy tablets that actually back that up. Now, again, even if you say the holy tablets is outdated, our foundation will never be outdated, because that's what we stand on, right? And so you can't say that a foundation of a culture of people is outdated unless that group of people stop standing on that foundation. The only difference between the imperial order and what we refer to in the imperial order as Orthodox Nuwaubians is they don't see it in a systematic way, although they accept those beliefs. Because you tell me a Nuwaubian that don't accept non-ether as the creator spiritual substance of black people, I'm going to look at them funny. You show me a Nuwaubian that does not believe that there is a such thing as the spell of Leviathan, and that the doctrine that was created by the master teacher was literally created to counteract that. That's going to sound real funny to me, right? So the concepts of our foundation, as far as the words that's being used to describe it, is new, but the foundation is the foundation.